That would be technically correct.
Welcome to Casual Politics, Lord Tim. Thank you very much for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you. You need no introduction. You've been member of the House of Lords since 1995. You replaced your father, Alec Douglas Hume, the former Prime Minister from 1963 to 1964. As you may know, this year marks the 20th year that he passed. Very sadly, he passed away back in 1995. So my first question was that in his latest years alive, in what way was he still active in politics?
After my mother died in 1990, he had a stroke fairly soon after that, and wasn't active at all from 1990 until he died. Before then, he didn't go very much to House of Lords. In the latter days, before then, because he loved being in Scotland, and really, and he also felt that people who are now in politics ought to be allowed to get on with it themselves and not be interfered by past senior people interfering. And on the whole, ex-politicians talk far too much and have views which they hope will influence the current leaders. My father never thought that and thought it was best to keep out of the light.
So, what did you think about John Major's premiership? Did he ever say anything to
he admired
concern?
John. It was a sort of quieter regime. My father approved of the back to basics policy. So he certainly liked it, and John very kindly read a lesson at my father's memorial service, and he certainly wouldn't have asked him if my father hadn't admired him, and everybody knew that my father admired him, so John did marvellously.
And your father worked with 5 prime ministers: Chamberlain in 1940s, Winston Churchill, Anthony Eden, Macmillan, and then Edward Heath in the 70s, and then he took his retirement from the House of Commons. So, which one of them did he work very closely?
Probably most closely with Macmillan. He was
His foreign secretary.
he was foreign secretary at the time, and they virtually spoke to each other every day, wherever they were. It used to be quite fun trying to get them both making a scrambler machine work, because they each pushed the button at each end at the wrong time. But he was very close to him. Under Anthony Eden, he was in the Commonwealth office, but and it was sort of serious. But he wasn't really part of the inner group in serious. He was more there to keep the Commonwealth informed of what was happening, and so he wasn't that close to to Anthony Eden. Churchill basically told him to go to Scotland and quell those turbulent Scots and not come back until he did. But he didn't really work that closely with him. No, I suppose Macmillan was the one who did. And Ted Heath, considerable degree as well. But I think he probably admired Macmillan more than anybody else.
Because they both fought actually over the First World War. Was that right? Did they fought alongside each other?
No.
No, they didn't.
No, no, my father signed up for the Second World War, or went for a medical, but it was then eventually discovered that he had spinal tuberculosis and he couldn't fight, and he was lying on his back in a plaster cast for 2 years during the war, which he was very miserable about because all his friends were fighting, but he couldn't go. And so that was that. But he went on being an MP, although obviously if you're on your back for 2 years and can't move, you can't do much then. Then he lost his seat in 1945 and won it back again in 1950.
And in 1963, when Hal Macmillan resigned as Prime Minister, his name was not on the list. So why did he decide to put his name on the list?
He was asked to by a lot of friends who came along and saying, look, there's a group who don't like, who don't want to serve under Butler, group who don't want to serve under Aylsham. But we think that you could bring the lot together,
Mhm.
bring everybody together. And my father resisted it for quite a long time. He didn't want to be Prime Minister. He was very happy as Foreign Secretary and loved that job. But he didn't want to be Prime Minister.
But because Macmillan, he didn't want Rab Butler to become Prime Minister either.
I don't think Macmillan's views actually came into it. It was the, I mean, Macmillan eventually, I think, advised the Queen that she should oust my father. But there were 4 groups of people canvassed: the parties and the constituencies, the cabinet, the Lords, and the Commons. And it became clear from those canvasses that a lot of people didn't want either Butler or Hailsham.
But Enoch Powell and young MacLeod, they didn't want to serve under your father, under his premiership, and then they urged other MPs as well to not do so. What was that?
There was a meeting with what's called the Sloane Street meeting, when Ian MacLeod said he wouldn't serve. He thought my father was the wrong image, perfectly fair judgment. And he thought probably, I think, by saying that he wouldn't, then other people wouldn't. But the only other person who didn't was Enoch Powell. And Enoch told my father afterwards, he said, I told Ian MacLeod I wouldn't serve under you, so I've got to stick to my word, what I gave to Ian MacLeod, but actually I would rather like to. But I promised Ian MacLeod, so I went. It was very honourable of him at the time to say that, and he was loyal to Ian. But they were the only 2 who stayed out of the cabinet.
But he invited them afterwards when he lost the election, but he invited them to his shadow cabinet, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Did he want to unite his party? Was it a unitary?
Well, it was
figure?
a different situation then when you're in opposition to what you are in government. So, I mean, Ian was a brilliant Chancellor Exchequer and a brilliant economist. And sadly he died far too soon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously he was a very bright chap who ought to have been in the cabinet. So, if I invited him once, I won't invite him again.
And your father, he didn't like when Anthony Barber, he replaced young MacLeod as his replacement.
I never really talked to my father about his views on Barber. I think they got on perfectly right as far as I know.
And in 19... So what were your... Because your father was only Prime Minister for a year, less than a year, just 2 days short than a year. And what were his achievements as Prime Minister that he was very proud of?
I don't think he took particular pride in anything. I mean, he was very pleased at having thought that we were going to lose the election by a mile. We actually were very, very close indeed by the end of it. An anchor poll said we'd lose by 100 seats when he first took over. And we lost by 4 or whatever it was. He had to spend a lot of his time going around the country because he wasn't well known. And therefore in achievement, it was more of a question of becoming known. The fact that he was human. And, the opposition were going around saying aristocrats, they all had 3 heads and 5 arms and looked extraordinary, outdated and all the rest of it. And I think people were pleasantly surprised that he looked perfectly normal.
And he spent only a few days in London, campaigning in London, and he went before the country to talk to them. So that was...
Yes, he went back and forth, but he couldn't get to his own constituency very much.
And did his aristocratic background and his image damaged him when he was Prime Minister? And one of the reasons that he lost to a grammar school boy, Harold Wilson.
Yes, I mean the opposition made a play of the fact he was aristocratic and out of touch and all the rest of it.
Did it work?
I didn't think it did really. I mean my father made the point that Wilson was also the 14th Mr. Wilson, which was actually perfectly true. So just because it happened to be Earl, so what? And everybody goes back a long time. I mean some people it's easy to trace that lineage. I dare say it did in some places, but going around the country, I mean, everyone was extremely kind to him, and they may not have agreed with his politics, but nobody held it against him, that I ever heard.
And he was never at ease with interviews with television. Why was that? Unlike how Wilson
Wilson was, he was good at it, and actually Harold Macmillan was quite good at it.
Mm.
My father never had to do it very much, I don't think. And, in the foreign secretary's job, okay, you've got television cameras on you and all the rest of it, but he never really had to. Well, once he left the House of Commons in 1951, he never really had aggressive people shouting at him and screaming, or asking aggressive questions. And it started all over again when Robin Day asked him the same question 14 times over. Was whether he would throw his hat in the ring for the leadership. And he didn't like that much. After, I mean, eventually he became very good friends with Robin Day. But he didn't like confrontational politics when it comes to it.
And he fought his campaign on two issues, prosperity and the nuclear deterrent. Why he didn't fight on more issues that British people were facing at the time?
He fought on what he thought were the most important topics. I mean, the nuclear deterrent was particularly relevant at that moment.
But still now?
Well, there was the same debate going on. Actually,
After 50 years.
But we had Khrushchev with the Cuban crisis and all the rest of it, which was very much still in people's minds. Whereas recently we haven't actually sort of had a great deal on the nuclear side, apart from Iran getting it. And I don't think most people think about that, America. But it was very much more in people's minds than that in those days. And even if it was camped on the doorstep, it came up much more than it did now. Prosperity, I suppose, was the it was thrown from 1959. Never had it so good, or still never having it so good. As they call it, prosperity.
And he had a grasp for foreign affairs, but some people they argue, but not for domestic issues. Do you agree with that?
I suppose you could say he was a bit out of date on domestic issues, because he was on the foreign side of the Commonwealth or the Foreign Office for what, 12 years before, 15, whatever it was. Anyway, and for quite a long time before becoming Prime Minister. And he thought gratefully that other people get on with running that domestic side. So he was out of date, but bear in mind that he was an MP for a mining constituency and had to know all the sort of problems that individuals had for a long time. And right throughout the 40s, when he was nursing to get his constituency back, he was always trying to find out what the domestic problems were. So he knew quite a lot about it.
And it was at the time. In 1970, it was very unusual that a former prime minister accepted to become foreign secretary. Why did he decide to become foreign secretary all over again?
I think he knew that Ted wanted him to be, probably.
Did he enjoy it more than he enjoyed being prime minister, being foreign secretary?
He didn't really enjoy being Prime Minister. The whole thing, cramming everything into a year. If he'd been able to do it for longer, he might have started to enjoy it. But I mean, he was still politically very, very active. He knew when he was Shadow Foreign Secretary throughout the Wilson era, he was very much in touch. He had ideas what could be done more. And Ted wanted him to do it. He was that way.
And in 1974, he didn't contest again his seat. Why he didn't? He didn't. Was he just fed up with party politics? In the House of
he
Commons?
thought it was time to move on. He'd done a stint at it. Previously, he'd reorganised the way the party was elected. he really didn't have much more to do, or necessarily to do with party politics.
Mm-hmm.
And so on that basis, what's really the point of any constituency?
No.
And when he went on being MP, he was only really was interested back into the foreign field again. So it was actually better to go back in the House of Lords.
And your father was a very unitary figure within the party, so as Harold Macmillan, but Edward Heath's successor, Lady Thatcher, she was a very divisive figure. What did you think of Thatcher years in Downing Street?
Well, she was very successful, and historians will be very kind to her, I think, in the future. And obviously what people talk about now, defeating Arthur Scargill and trade unions, and the Falklands, the two things that will stand out against her will be people, what people think about Europe. Maastricht will be held against her. Because a lot of people think she shouldn't have signed up to that. But it was a sort of golden time of British politics, and she did very well.
And you said that your father, he spent most of his latest years in Scotland. What did you think of the rise of nationalism in Scotland?
Well, he chaired a Grand Committee, and he always said if people had done more at that stage, then the Scottish nationalists might have, or St Andrews Heights could have been gently handed over more power to them. And so he thought that the timing was wrong. He thought it was inevitable that the people of Scotland should have more of a say in what went on. But he was critical of his own leaders for not doing more.
In 1995, you replaced your father after his death in the House of Lords, and then Tony Blair, when he became Prime Minister in 1997, he pledged to abolish hereditary peers. 20 years on, do you think that was a mistake or not?
I would rather it hadn't happened, put it that way. I think even then one could have sort of thinned down numbers in a different way, but Robert Cranborne, as he was then, was sort of fighting for our existence at all, and did very well for anybody to hang on. I mean, hereditary peers actually reduces the age of the House of Lords, because on the whole, appointed peers are of a certain age. You get young people, younger people taking over when it comes to hereditary peers. The House of Lords is the old adage: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the fact is that what we send back is pretty good. There are so many arguments now going on about how to change it around and who should be there. I'm an advocate of having it mostly appointed, and if there are one or two hereditaries who deserve it, well, that's fine.
And after the government's defeat over tax credit cuts, Prime Minister pledged to flood the House of Lords with more hereditary peers. Perhaps it's not sure. Do you?
He didn't pledge to. He said that was an option, I think, of doing it. I hope that Tom Strathclyde can come up with a better solution to do it. I think the government made a slight mistake in bringing in an instrument which could be defeated by a wrecking amendment, and that was probably an error. I don't know for certain that. I wasn't involved in the sort of discussions about it. But it will hasten the time. There'll be some reform of the Lords. Yeah.
And your father, he was one nation Tory that we don't see nowadays within your party. Why is that? Why one nation Tory just disappeared all of a sudden?
It's very sad it has. I mean, we were the Conservative and Unionist Party, and that sort of died. I think we ought to get back to being that. We've now, with a referendum was fairly close but decisive, and we are one country, and so let's shout it from the rooftops. We are the United Kingdom.
So, do you want the Prime Minister to stick more to one nation Tory, as your father did?
Well, I mean, just the one nation, full stop. I mean, they can be Labour or anything else, but we've got to stick together. We're a small island anyway. And the component parts are nothing like as powerful as the whole.
Mhm.
And so we can't just stay United Kingdom.
Two last questions, very quick. Two last questions. The first one is that in the old days we had Bjorn MacLeod, we had Alec Douglas Humes, we had Michael Foots, and we had Dennis Hillis. But nowadays we don't have them anymore. Is it sad that Parliament doesn't produce those figures, those giants anymore?
I don't think the world is producing the same giants
Mm.
if we really want. Some of the huge figures of the past, whether it's Gandhi or Lee Kuan Yew and these people, right the way around the world, were a bit short of what I suppose we would call statesmen, who emerged, from having done either through period length of time or through their own brilliance, will be remembered by history as that. I'm actually rather sad we haven't got more eccentrics. Eccentrics in Parliament were always great fun. Whether it was Michael Onslow or John Haddington or some of these people. And they always made some splendid remarks. Sometimes they were very appropriate remarks. But it would be nice to make the world more fun and laugh at jokes more.
Mhm.
The world's too serious now. We're all politically correct. They're rubbish.
And my last question, how do you think that the British people will remember your father in the future, or in contemporary British politics?
I think he was a nice
remember?
man with the right ideas, but they will probably still think that he was out of touch,
Mm.
however much he wasn't out of touch. Probably how they'll remember him.
It was a great pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.